Hi there, I'm Carlton Reid of BikeBiz.com, and welcome to podcast number 24. As well as being posted on YouTube, the Cycling News and Views podcast is also available on iTunes. Subscribe to get extra audio features and videos. For instance, there's a bonus interview with Phil Liggett over on iTunes or any other places where you can download podcasts. When you're looking for it, search for Cycling News and Views. And talking of Phil Liggett, here's an interview with him I recorded on Sunday, which was the 13th of August. This was at the Phil and Friends ride in the Peak District. It was a really, really grotty day and not worthy of getting my camera out. So the ride photos in this podcast are of Phil and Friends rides from previous years. Phil Liggett is the Tour de France commentator for OLN of the US and ITV in the UK. How busy do you think he's been with commentaries on the Floyd Landler scandal?
CNN sent an outside broadcast vehicle to my house and satellited live hourly bulletins last Saturday with the announcement of the B sample, as expected, compared with the A sample was the same. I'm still very sceptical about the whole thing. I don't know Floyd Landis intimately, but I do know his beliefs, and he's a Mennonite, and I got a feeling he's not telling lies, but I don't know. I want to believe him. The fact is that some of the reports are saying that there was introduced testosterone. But there are a number of anomalies to the case. First of all, he has 9 drugs tests during the Tour de France. Only 1 proves positive. And testosterone doesn't just disappear from the system, and he had tests either side of the positive, and yet they were negative. The laboratory is unscrupulous, to say the least, because they shouldn't know the sample they're testing. They should only know a number. Last year